Diego, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. Congratulations on your amazing milestone.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Alexander. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And, indeed, it's a huge milestone, not just for Exomad, but for the whole carbon removal market. It shows really how industrial scale can be happening, not only with promises, but actually with deliveries.
Why don't you just share really quickly about what it is that you announced?
So today we announced that we have surpassed over 2.3 million tons of contracts for carbon removals, but also that we have actually delivered over 340,000 tons of carbon removal certificates up to date. So that's very, very important as key for us, because at the end of the day, we all want the best for the market, but we actually have to deliver. So that's what Exomad Green is doing right now, is actually delivering. And that's what the market right now, it's actually focusing at. It's actually going for and focusing on deliveries as well.
It's interesting you say, because I know at CDR fyi, as we track the market, when we thought about what was the metric that we most wanted to track, what we came up with was tons delivered. And it was really because at the end of the day, it is obviously incredibly important, especially at this stage of the market, that there are the contracts signed. But really what it comes down to is it's not just the contract signed, but they're being delivered on. So congratulations on both milestones. And thank you for your willingness to share your learnings with the market. There's many suppliers and buyers who can learn from the Exomad green journey. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about how you got started, how you entered carbon removal, what's enabled your growth, and what lessons other market participants can take from your experience. Just, right off the bat, like for people who don't know Exomad Green, what did the company do and how did it get started?
Well, first of all, Exomad Green is a division of Exomad, our main company. Exomad is the main sustainable wood producer and exporter of Bolivia. We actually harvest sustainably wood and transform it into different products such as flooring, veneer, instrument part and pieces, finished instruments such as guitars, violins. So we're a wood company per se, an industrial company. And what Exomad Green was a solution to do a circular integrated company, by which we actually found a solution to a big problem in our area, which is the tremendous amount of residues that got left in our industry. So in the wood industry, if you don't know, about 50 to 60% of the actual log gets turned into waste, because it's simple geometrical shape. So basically, a cylinder gets transformed into a kind of rectangular piece, and by just that fact, don't take into consideration all the bark, all the sapwood, and the rest, and all the residues, you generate tremendous amounts of waste. That being said, 50 to 60% of any and all productions, it doesn't matter if it's in Bolivia, Brazil, United States, Europe, China, wherever it is, it gets transformed into waste. And that residue, especially in the global south, without having any use, got incinerated in the past. So thinking about a solution to this, we came out with Exomad Green, which is to fully integrate all our residues, and as well residues from all our partners that actually work with us as well, into a product that not only fully integrated a circular type of economy, but also transformed a problem into a solution, which is to find a solution for the waste into something that became biochar, which at the end of the day, it captures carbon dioxide it permanently stores it in for hundreds of thousands of years, but also it's a it's a soil enhancement that actually improves the soil to reduce deforestation, to improve soil yield or crop yield, and to improve the security for food for many of the communities in which we operate.
So super interesting. And what I really love about the stories, it's not just Exomad Green is a CDR company, but that it was born out of an existing business that had a problem. So I am actually just really curious. And I really want to just double click on. I feel like there's probably a lot of other businesses like the lumber producer, if you like, or the sustainable timber producer that probably have opportunities like this and aren't necessarily thinking about. So, what was it that had you go from, wow, we have a lot of waste and we're incinerating it, to, oh, there might be an opportunity here that we can pursue for not only that there's a business reason, but there's also a sustainability benefit?
So if you take it on that perspective, I think that any company that's industrially scalable or it's industrially generates tremendous amounts of residues and it's looking for a way onto managing them sustainably, they have an opportunity. An opportunity that you have to think of this, first of all, as a logistical part, then an industrial part where you should have the experience. And third, and last but not least, also logistics again. And by logistics, I mean that when you're inputting the hundreds or thousands of tons of material of biomass that you get inputted by, to the actual facility per day, is tremendous amounts of logistics that you need to manage. Secondly, when you're talking about the industrial, you're talking about, for instance, our facility in Concepcion and Riberalta, they have roughly around 20,000 square meters, which is over 220,000 square feet of warehouse area where you have the operations and storage of all the biochar basically. And you have over 200 people on each of those facilities working. So it's not a simple operation. It is really an industrial operation. And it's also a big challenge on the logistical part because it's not the fact of just producing the biochar that gets the credit out for you. It's the fact that you're actually producing the biochar and applying it on a proper sink site where it's going to be stored for the next hundreds of thousands of years. And you can prove it with an MRV, without any reasonable doubt that it's done so properly.
I feel like you just really kind of segued exactly into, one of the next questions I wanted to ask you, which is you've now reached a scale that very few durable CDR suppliers have achieved. And, whether it be the overall volume that you've sold and delivered, you've signed up obviously some top tier customers. Microsoft announced the largest biochar deal in history with you last year. You've got leading partners like Supercritical and Carton Future. You work with the leading biochar certification body in Puro. So what do you see as some of the elements that have enabled you to get to where you are now and get to this momentous milestone? It's not something that happens overnight. And you've been able to build this up over the course of the last few years. What has enabled you to make this progress that you have, that others can learn from?
I think that from day one, and most importantly, we did not go pilot. We skipped pilot and went directly into industrial. So that was critical on the early years on this market when they were facilities of delivering 5,000, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 tons of CDRs per year, we were the first facility to deliver 60,000 tons per year. So basically, we skipped the pilot, we took the risk, and we went into industrial. Secondly, we aligned the feedstocks, we aligned the operations, certifications, and with that came the buyers. So at the end of the day, it gave us a real operation that was not dependent on different factors, on execution per se, but that actually gathered enough confidence for the market to get the sales out there. I would say to all the new upcoming projects that you have to take the risk, that you have to do it. But first of all, you have to actually understand what you're doing. And what you're doing, it's an industrial operation. It's not a project behind a computer. It's not a project behind a desk. It's actually boots on the ground, real people, hundreds of people running in there. If you're doing this big scale, you're solving problems for communities. You're solving problems on air quality. You're solving problems on crop yields and improving all of this. But it really takes a lot of effort to do it. So it's a really big project. Whereas if you do take the risk because you have all these aligned points, which we talked previously, you can and you will do it. And if you do it, the market is there and the market is demanding that we actually execute and not only promise.
A lot of companies do a sort of a little bit more of a piecemeal approach, as you said. They go to pilot and get the first contract, get some financing, hit step by step. And it sounds like you made more of a, you know what, here's the deep end, and we're not just going to put our feet in the water. We are jumping in. But you did the jumping in after actually getting a thorough understanding about the market and what the requirements were. And as you said, not only sort of going in, but also the coming out and what the end product could be used for with the farmers. So it sounds like a very strategic undertaking on your part before you then did the full jump in.
Actually, we did, but we did it with also knowledge behind because at the end of the day, we were an industrial company. We knew and we already ran facilities, but we also understood the demand that was not being supplied on the market. And that being said, we think that as Exomad Green, we were able to successfully gather up not only the problem, but come up with a solution on how to do it at the scale that the market was demanding today.
Right. So this actually goes really well into the next question, which is, one of the themes of your announcement, the key themes you even mentioned in the beginning, is the market moving beyond promises to delivery. And I've heard from other CEOs of CDR suppliers where, the big challenges are like financing or I'm going to get that first big contract. But once you get that first big contract, the challenge immediately moves from I've got to get the contract to I've got to deliver on the contract. So again, you've mentioned about operations. What is it about Exomad Green that gave you comfort that you were going to be able to actually deliver on the volumes that you were signing? And I think a lot of it you've touched upon in terms of like you already have an establishing operation.
I think that, first of all, and if we're talking about the market, my feeling today is that the market wants more than promises, actually deliveries. And that being said, buyers are really looking at real assets, track records, MRV credibility, and the market is moving more than really nice storytelling projects to a real execution. It's moving from a capacity on paper to what's actually being delivered in tons today. So that being said, for us as Exomad Green, I think that we skipped the first part of being a pilot project to jumping and taking the risk onto being a full-scale project, and that paid off. 100% it paid off. I'm not saying that anybody and everybody should do it, but what I'm saying is that right now the market is evolving from the initial stages onto a more mature type of market that's actually demanding something, not wanting to develop just only a market. And we see this by all the announcements being released in the past weeks. So what you need to do as a new supplier is actually first come up with a project that's feasible, that's doable. And once you can actually do something and deliver without any doubt, then you have a project that's actually scalable, and that's actually, something that you can do and bring it onto a bank, that you can bring it out to a big name buyer. And at that point, you actually have a real solid project.
Got it. Makes a ton of sense. Obviously, you had some unique advantages, but your strategic bet has obviously paid off very well. We're getting close to the end here. A couple other questions. Since the very beginning, Exomad Green, you've not only been delivering and developing very strongly, but you've also been very open about sharing data. I know that, whether it be you, Francesco, we frequently have exchanged emails about data, the orders, the deliveries. So you've been very open and transparent. Why has being transparent been so important to you and part of the ethos that you've had from the very beginning?
I think that first of all, transparency is a backbone of this market. So without transparency, you have nothing. So a market is built on trust. Buyers are going to be buying from you from trust, of course, with proven record as well. But there is a big amount of transparency that has to be there. So if you're a company that's not being transparent enough, I'm very sure you're not going to do very well. I'm sure that there are companies out there that, feel different and they want to keep a privacy, but this is a very transparent market in which you have to share data early, you have to build trust because that accelerates the market. And as a result, you have faster buyer confidence, you have a stronger positioning. And at the end of the day, transparency is not a risk, it's a growth strategy. If you can deliver, transparency becomes your advantage. That's our experience at Exomad Green.
It's so interesting. We just actually were coming out with a new report where we surveyed experienced buyers. The number one core requirement for durable CDR buyers was minimum of 100-year permanence. And the number two was transparency. So it's just so interesting, and it's commendable, obviously, that you hit upon that as a strategy and as a requirement from very early on. Okay, last question. Seems like every few months you come out with a major growth announcement, whether it be, again, the large, commitments, from Microsoft or other ones that you locked up, or the partnerships, super critical that was, mentioned, and that you've had a recurring and growing partnership with them. So what do you see as the outlook for the biochar market in the coming years?
What I do think is that, first of all, CDR is entering into an industrial phase. And within the tech-based CDR, biochar stands out as being scalable now. And what the market needs are more buyers, more financing, more standardization. But what we can promise in the CDR market is that we have technologies such as biochar and others that are ready today to deliver the quantity that they need. We're entering the industrial phase of carbon removal. And at the end of the day, the winners within this market will be the ones that actually can deliver at scale. So what we're focusing is to be there, to have the scale that the market demands from now, the transparency that the market demands from us, and to be able to supply not only the demand, but also the transparency that's needed within the market.
Got it. Diego, thank you. Your announcement is not only a company milestone, it's a market milestone about what it takes to move from idea to commitment to delivery. You know, about the importance of aligning operational execution, which you mentioned a number of times, with certification, buyer confidence, transparency, and most importantly, about how there is an opportunity in CDR and more broadly in climate for companies that think beyond their core business. So congratulations again to you, to the entire Exomad Green team, and we appreciate your transparency for the market, and we appreciate your partnership with CDR.fyi.
Well, thank you, Alexander. And I think that just as a last statement, I want to say that this milestone shows that the carbon removal market is no longer theoretical right now. It can be built, it can be financed, and it can be delivered today. And we are doing it at the scale in Exomad Green. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the interview. I really appreciate this with the Verdo FYI.